Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the DMICE Thursday conference. We have a little bit different of a topic today, but it's a very important one, and Joanne Valerius and Karen Eden set this up, and I think it's important for us to hear. The topic today is about disability awareness. OHSU has a program in this area to help people be more aware of, work well with those who have various disabilities. Our speaker is Ann Jaquiss, who's the Disability Awareness Trainer and Community Outreach Specialist at OHSU. He conducts trainings in this area, which he'll tell us about, and he helps recruit and retain people with disabilities as well as veterans at OHSU. He's a graduate of the Samford University Cumberland School of Law, and I also saw in his bio that he's worked some for the Portland Trail Blazers.
That's correct.
In the past. So I will turn it over to him, and just a reminder for those who are listening in cyberspace, you can always tweet a question to using the hashtag DMICEConf, DMICECONF. So.
Great. Thank you. Thanks very much for that introduction. It's true that I did work for the Portland Trailblazers. I was the shortest employee for the Trailblazers. I worked there for 7 years, and I'm glad to be here now. So thanks for coming out today, and I'm sorry that pizza had to be the draw, but hopefully you'll have a good time here today too. So disability awareness is a relatively new thing at OHSU, and as far as I know, OHSU is the only place that does this. And what I'm trying to do is make people who don't have disabilities more comfortable talking to people who do have disabilities. So people with disabilities at OHSU have said in surveys and focus groups and through discussions that they don't feel as welcome here as they would like at OHSU, because people without disabilities are often reluctant to talk to people with disabilities because if you don't have a disability, you're afraid of offending or saying the wrong thing to the person with a disability, and then you're less likely to engage or interact. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am 49 years old now, and I got hit by a car when I was 2. So having grown up with a disability, that's the first time, this that I'm telling you now at OHSU, that people are reluctant to talk to people with disabilities, so they don't talk to people with disabilities. I'd never heard that in my 47 years as a person with a disability. But I've heard it so many times since I've been here that I believe that it's true. And if you and Greta will attest to this, that if you hang out with me for more than 5 or 6 minutes, you'll have plenty of reasons not to talk to me. Okay, so I'm going to try and be funny, and it'll be a lot funnier if you give me the mercy laugh, the pity laugh. I'm not above that. Okay, so that's I'm about to go over the ground rules, but I'm just going to go ahead and jump to that. Rule number 1, I'm very funny, so if you think I'm trying to be funny, go ahead and laugh. Throw that out there. I appreciate that. Rule number 2, since we'll just jump to that, go ahead and jump to that. Unless it is for a professional reason, and you might have them, you might have a professional reason to ask. Don't ask a person about their disability, how they acquired it, how it manifests, whatever it is. A disability is but a part of a person with a disability. In fact, it is often a very small part. It doesn't define them. It doesn't often guide them. See the person, don't see the disability. So I say that to you now as an adult talking to a room full of adults, and I believe that that's absolutely true. So rule number 1, I'm funny. Rule number 2, don't ask about a person's disability unless it's for a professional reason. And then rule number 3, this is, I call, a Vegas training. Who here has, or in cyberspace, has been to Las Vegas? Would you like to tell me what you did the last time you were in Las Vegas?
I attended a health information technology conference.
You know, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So I call it a Vegas training because this is a safe room and safe space, whatever. Never worked in cyberspace before. This is cool. So what that means is there are no bad questions. There are no dumb questions. If you want to know something, ask, please, and I will do my very best to answer it. And if I don't know, I'm a very convincing liar and I'll make you believe I know what I'm talking about. That was a joke. Not that good a liar. What we're trying to do today is make you feel more confident and competent. I want to challenge some of your experiences and expectations, and then also I'm going to talk a little bit about person-first language. Person-first language, see the person, don't see the disability. So it's a person with a disability. It's a person who uses a wheelchair, a person who is blind. Are there any cyclists in the room? Okay, so you're people too? Person who rides a bike. Really? That joke always gets a laugh. That's tough. This is a tough crew. This is let's jump in. So Greta has. Sorry, I'm running a little bit ahead of schedule. So Greta has handed out a survey. Normally, I would send that survey out way well in advance, and I send it out usually via the Survey Monkey, and it's confidential and it's anonymous. So I don't know any of you, and so it's still going to be confidential and anonymous. So I don't want you to hand them back in, but if you just read along with the survey as we go through, we'll talk about some things. We'll cover some areas relative to disability. And some of the questions, I'm just going to go ahead and be honest, horribly poorly written. I wrote them. I don't know how to write questions, but we'll get to that. Okay? So let's jump in. Let's go ahead and jump into the survey. The average person with a disability. So who thinks they know what this answer is? You were relatively close to first, so E. Right, none of the above. So there's no average person, right? No average person. No two disabilities are the same. There's no average disability. There's no average person with a disability. So person-first language, that's a good example. We see the person, we don't see the disability. Cool? Any questions? Pretty simple so far. Okay, question number 2. Who here, first, before we jump into question number 2, who knows what the Americans with Disability Act is? I'm assuming a lot of people do. And is there anybody who doesn't have experience or knowledge of the ADA? Yes. That's good. I'm glad. So the Americans with Disability Act is a landmark legislation passed 26 years ago, signed into law by the first President Bush. And what it was supposed to be, and in some ways has been, was the great leveler. The great level of the proverbial playing field for people with disabilities. It was going to provide access. It was going to provide opportunity. So it was guaranteed access, guaranteed opportunity all across the board. And in some ways, it's been very, very successful. So the doorways, great. Curb cuts, great. Braille, almost everywhere, great. So it's inclusive. It's supposed to provide that opportunity, that avenue for people to access stuff. And again, some ways it's been great, and in some ways it's been more than a little disappointing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that right now. So in the 4 ways that are the biggest letdowns, one would be education. So a lot of very old buildings in the world of education, and very hard for people with disabilities to navigate those campuses. Consequently, they don't. Public housing. Housing is a big issue. It's a huge issue, and it's going to be the biggest issue as the baby boomers age up, and more of them become people with disabilities. The third one is health care. So it's supposed to provide equal access to health care, but guess what? It doesn't. And to be fair, it really can't, because there's so many types of disabilities and so many different needs of people. And again, no average person with a disability, that we see that people will have unique needs and unique challenges with access as it goes along. But what we're here to talk to you about today mainly is employment. So going back to the early part about people with disabilities working at OHSU. So we did a survey allowed by law for the first time ever 2 years ago, and it asked people at OHSU to voluntarily self-disclose if, in fact, they had a disability. Because the feds want to track that. The feds expect all federal contractors to have 7% employment rate for people with disabilities across all job levels and all job categories, except the very highly technical. That we get a pass on that, but we're still expected to be 7% institution-wide and 7% at all job categories. From that survey, and we had more than 85% of the OHSU employees who took the survey, participated in the survey, 85%, we had a 3.4% rate of people with disabilities. And the feds want that to be 7, so we've got a long way to go. Now, I think, and people with whom I work think and believe also, that the rate is actually probably higher than 3.4%, but there are a lot of reasons why people are uncomfortable disclosing that they have a disability. There's a huge stigma attached, right? And part of the purpose of this training is that we're going to hopefully talk about that stigma and start working away. It's a huge stigma. It's a huge problem. We're not going to get there through one training, but we're going to start on that path. Okay, so that's the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now the thing that the Americans with Disability Act gave us that we never had before was the clause, the reasonable accommodation. So reasonable accommodation, if I am qualified to do a job, but I need some accommodation to make me able to do that job from an access point or from a safety point, then the employer is obligated to do that, right? I don't want any special treatment. The law doesn't give me special treatment, but it would give me a reasonable accommodation. And the best reasonable accommodation I could think of, let's say I work in a kitchen and I chop carrots. That's my job. And if the workstation is up here and I'm chopping carrots, what's the message? Don't eat the carrots. Okay, I thought that was funnier than it was. I appreciate that. Okay, so a reasonable accommodation would give me a workspace where I would be less likely to chop my fingers off. Okay, so and that would be reasonable, because giving me a workspace is probably just finding another table or stealing one from here. Then I'm in the kitchen, I'm working, everything's great. But employers have traditionally felt like a reasonable accommodation is going to be unreasonably expensive. Consequently, people with disabilities have a much lower employment rate than people without disabilities. And in fact, it's increased. The unemployment rate for people with disabilities has increased since the passing of the ADA. Okay? And I would like to say at this point that, in fact, people with disabilities like me are often bargain hires because we provide our own chairs. Okay, there you go. I got you, though, that one. All right, so that's a long way to talk about question 2. Who knows what the answer to question 2 is? How does the ADA define disability? Looking for a guess. Anybody? A brave person? A? A is right. Did anybody? A is absolutely right. So it's a statutory question, and you see some statutory language there. So it's a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. Now, to be honest, I'm asking for honesty. Did anybody pick C? Did anybody think that C might be the answer? Okay. Now, there's one reason why people self-identify as disabled that I know of. I've only ever heard of one. Do you know what it is? Parking. Okay, good. We get the good parking, rock star parking. Okay, but that is actually, in all the trainings that I've done over 100 at OHSU in the last year and a half. People often pick C. That's the most often picked answer to this question. Greta, number 3, please. So, what percentage of the U.S. population has a disability? Who wants to take a... Yes, sir.
Is there a definition of limiting, and is there a definition of major life activity?
There are many definitions of major life activities, and there's a legal definition and there's a medical definition, and it's generally, though, common sense. And we're going to get into a little bit about what a disability might be. So my disability, I got hit by a car when I was 2, spinal cord injury, can't walk. That's a major life activity. It could be, though, a hidden disability, like some sort of congestive heart failure, depression, diabetes, things like that. So those things that limit you from having the opportunity to fully participate in life, that would be a general limitation of a major life activity. Good? Okay, cool. Question number 3. What percentage of the U.S. population has a disability? Yell it out. That's right, 19%. You're all right, 19%. 1 out of every 5, let's call it 20%. 1 out of every 5. What's that mean? That means 56 million people in this country alone. Worldwide, it's 21%. Okay? That's 1.2 billion people. What's that mean? We're taking over. And you're welcome to join. But if you think about that now, like I said before, the percentage rate of employees at OHSU who self-disclose that they have a disability, 3.4%. The general population, 20%. Now, some of the people in that 20% are too young or too old to work, but we would expect, I think, statistically, and I don't know anything about statistics other than this, statistically, we should expect to see more than 3.4%. Okay? Yes, sir.
Is that 3.4% coming from medical records or just a survey of who reports?
That's a survey of who reports. My department of Affirmative Action and Equal Opportunity, we don't access medical records for this purposes, and the feds don't want that. So I can't force you to disclose, And in fact, I could say that I don't have a disability in my job. I encourage, I would absolutely never say that because A, it's dishonest. B, I can't hide this. And C, I'm not ashamed of it, and I want people to know. And when I am recruiting people to OHSU, I always encourage them to disclose, because that's the way we're going to fight the stigma. We're going to fight it from many different directions, but that is one way where people don't disclose, because there should be no penalty for that. For reasonable accommodation purposes, absolutely, absolutely. You just need to have a documented disability, and then you need to work with your department or your professor or whomever to get those accommodations. Did you press the question? Button? Sorry.
If disability is underreported,
Yep.
Has that been quantified?
Let me say this. Yes, in that as the census has in some magical formula determined that it's 20% or 19% of this population, and then 21%, because there's no way that anybody could collect that data specifically. So quantified in that way, I would say yes. Does that make sense?
Okay, so I'm specifically asking about underreporting. So if we have 3.4%
Yep.
here, that could indicate two things. One, that there's some sort of hiring bias, and something like that. Or two, that there's a huge stigmatic pressure
Yep.
that forces underreporting. And I'm wondering about how one would differentiate or start to look at that.
That's a great question, and I will do my very best to get that back to you. And so my contact information is going to be at the end of this, and I don't have that answer, to be honest, and I won't lie to you. Yes, sir.
What about those people that,
Are you pressing the button?
yeah,
Okay.
what about those people that would fall under the ADA's disability definition of someone who's disabled, but they don't really identify themselves as being disabled? What would you, I mean, some people might not report it because they feel their disability isn't actually a disability, and it's not really that big of a concern for them.
Well, I think that happens, and that's their right. I think that that just propagates the stigma. That just supports the stigma, and I think that creates more of a problem than it helps. Now, I know individually, on a case-by-case basis, not for me to say, but I think that underreporting and not admitting is ultimately defeating the purpose, defeating the cause. Any other questions? I love these questions. That's great. Okay, let's move on. Most people with disabilities prefer to be helped in performing daily life activities. True or false? False. Okay. So let me ask you this, and I'm just going to ask this as a blanket question. If I could, and I want to be clear that I can't, but if I could and there were no strings attached, hire for you, for everyone, individually, a cook, a cleaner, a chauffeur, somebody to do whatever, gardening, house cleaning, whatever. Is there anybody here, no strings attached, who wouldn't let me do that for them? Okay. And speaking on behalf of all people with disabilities, because I have the microphone, that was a joke. Speaking on behalf of all people with disabilities, I would absolutely prefer that too. I absolutely love it. I would love that. That would be awesome to have somebody do that for me, because then I could do stuff I want to do, not stuff I have to do. But what we don't want, and what I'm encouraging you from an OHSU perspective, is I don't want people to force help on me without asking me if I need help. Oftentimes, I will absolutely need help and will gladly take the help. But what I don't ever want is somebody to assume that I need the help and do something for me without talking to me. And that can be very upsetting, and that's the purpose of this question, is to think about why I'm here, to make OHSU a more welcoming place for disabilities, to encourage people to talk to people with disabilities, rather than forcing help on someone. And that could be as easy as opening a door, right? Always nice for somebody to open a door for somebody else. I love that, but what I don't like is just to grab the door and open it and not say anything. Hey, it looks like you're struggling. Can I help you with that door? Could I help get that door for you? You're carrying coffee, you're carrying a beer, whatever it is. Not carrying a beer at work. But if you're carrying coffee into a door, somebody come up to me and say, hey, can I get the door for you? That's great. I love that. And what I always say is, no, you know what? Let me get the door for you. and then I reach out like I'm going to open the door, and I hit the actuator. Because it's a shallow gesture by a shallow person. Okay, any questions? Any questions about that? Cool. Question 5. So, service animals come up a lot. In discussions at OHSU, I hear complaints and worries about service animals. So, is it okay to pet a service animal without asking permission? And why is that? They're working. They're working. Okay, that's great. So we know that dogs, like this dog here, can be service animals. There's one other type of animal that can be a service animal under the Americans with Disabilities Act and adopted by the state of Oregon. Does anybody know what that animal is? It is very much a miniature horse. That's exactly right. Points to you. Okay, and miniature horses act as seeing eye animals for people who are blind. Okay, and apparently they're at CHH all the time down the hill. I've never seen one, but anyway, that's cool. So let me ask you this. I'm coming back to you. Okay, so let's say tomorrow you come in. You work tomorrow. Your student work tomorrow. Whatever. You're going to be here tomorrow. You come in tomorrow and you look up ahead the building you report to, and you see a man and he's holding a leash, and the leash is attached to a chicken, and the chicken has a vest. And the vest has letters that say service animal on it. What would you do? Pet the chicken. That's the first. I like it. And okay, so you don't have to say you'd take a selfie, but I know you would. Right? But what else would you do? You would say you're skeptical, and you should be, right? And so then what would you do? Press that button. What would you do? Okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell everybody you know, everybody at OHSU who you know, who you work with, that there's a person with a service chicken. Why? Seriously, because we don't want anybody to be scared. We don't want anybody. Who's scared of chickens? I am. But let's say it's not a chicken. Let's say it's a sock. A snake wearing a sock. It's a sock. Let's say it's a snake wearing a sock, and the sock spells out service animal on it. Because it's Portland. That could happen. That happens. That happens. Right? What would you do then? Who likes snakes? Anybody? All right, leave. Kidding. So it's a person with a snake, and a lot of people, including me, are afraid of snakes. We don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable, anybody to be scared, whether they're a coworker, a patient, a visitor, or a caller, whatever. So don't do anything about the person other than call patient services or public safety. They know how to deal with that. And again, and they will, but you don't need to be a hero. You can ask if that's a service animal, but what are they going to say? Right. That's what the sock says. Service animal. Okay. So we know. What do we know? You got to ask, and you really shouldn't ask because they're working, right? To pet, right? And then we know it's a dog or it's a miniature horse, and if it's not a service animal. But it could be a therapy animal, right? And how do you know if an animal is a therapy animal at OHSU? Sorry? Press the button. Okay. They have, where's my tag? They have name tags. They have OHSU issued IDs, as do I somewhere. They have OHSU issued IDs, and that's how you can tell if it's a therapy animal. Okay? Now there's one other type of animal that's often confused with a therapy animal or a service animal, and it's called a companion animal. Okay? Companion animal is a 3-letter word that is a companion animal. Pet? Pet. Cat is a companion animal. Pet, though, was what I was looking for. Small points to you. So pets are not allowed at OHSU. Okay? And how do you tell if it's a companion animal and not a service animal? No. Well, no. Service animals don't always have a service animal jacket or a vest or a sock on them. They don't. Right? So there's but companion animal won't have an OHSU issued ID. It may be an animal other than a dog or a miniature horse, but it could be a dog. And not all dogs are trained to be service animals. And how do you tell if an animal is not a service animal? You could ask, is that a service animal? They're probably going to say it is, though. But you could ask. They might tell you the truth. But the other way you can tell is if the dog is making noise, making a mess, making somebody feel uncomfortable. Service animals don't do that. But pets do that. Companion animals do that. And again, we don't want anybody to have a bad time at OHSU. We don't want anybody to cause anybody else to have a bad time at OHSU. So if you have questions, Don't be a hero and call public safety. Okay? Any questions? Good. On to question 6. Okay. So the question on the survey that I handed out, do the terms disabled person and person with a disability mean the same thing? True or false? They do mean the same thing, true or false? False? Somebody say false? Somebody say true? Okay, so let me tell you, I told you that I'm 49 years old and I got hit by a car when I was 2, and I don't know if I told you, but I have a spinal cord injury. And when I was 2, I had a spinal cord injury, and I'm 49 now, and I still have a spinal cord injury, right? So my condition hasn't changed in those 47 years. Still have a spinal cord injury. But when I first got hit, I went to a Shriners Hospital for crippled children. So I was a cripple. And then after I was a cripple, I was a GIMP, and I was handicapped, and then I was handicapable, and I was physically challenged and differently able, and then now I heard recently that I experience a disability. I don't know what that means. But I'm also now at OHSU a person with a disability, right? So the way people have referred to me has changed many, many, many times since I've been a person with a disability. But my condition hasn't. So they've grown, they have learned those phrases, and they still use those phrases. I saw in an OHSU publication today somebody with a disability described as disabled person. We don't want to do that. We want to see the person first, right? So if somebody says disabled person, that gives me an opportunity to engage them in that conversation that, well, you don't want to see the disability. We don't want to limit a person. I don't know what a person's capable of in any way, but especially based on their physical condition, right? I can't see a person in a wheelchair and say, oh, well, that person can't climb Mount Everest. I don't know if they can, and I don't want to make that judge. And that's a judgment. That's a ridiculous example, but I use it as a point in saying that people with disabilities have climbed Mount Everest, right? So don't limit the person with the word. See the person first. Give them that expansive opportunity. Any questions? Somebody might ask the question, is that true for all people with disabilities? It's not, right? So the culture for people who are deaf disagree with that, and they don't like the phrase. They don't mind the phrase deaf person. It's part of the culture. It's something that a lot of them are comfortable with. And that's cool. That's on to them. But at OHSU, in our bylaws, we say we're a person-first culture. We see the person until we're told differently. If a person who is deaf wants to be called a deaf person, more power to them. But that's up to them, okay? You don't get to make that decision for them. Any questions? Okay, question 7. In speaking to a person who is deaf or hard of hearing, you should speak louder and slower. True and false? True or false? False? Who said that? Very brave. Did you press the button?
It's false.
False. Okay, that's great. Why?
Because usually they can hear you just fine if you don't know if they have cochlear implants or how bad their deafness is or if they can read lips.
Right. What about slower? Should you speak slower to them?
No.
Why not?
Because they can read lips just fine usually if they're reading lips and slowing down can actually usually screw them up.
That's exactly right, right? So what we say is that people with disabilities are experts in their abilities. They know what works for them. So you speak to a person as you would speak to anybody, right? And then if they can't hear you, they may ask you to speak louder. They may ask you to use sign language, or they may ask you to do something that works for them better than just speaking. That's on them. They have that power. Give them that opportunity. Cool? And you're absolutely right about don't speak slower to a person who reads lips, because that will upset their cadence and ability to read lips, right? And that's also true for people who use sign language of various types, particularly American Sign Language. People who use American Sign Language prefer not to be spoken to slower, because that will also upset their understanding of what you're saying. Any questions? Okay, question 8. Most disabilities are visible and obvious to others. True or false? False. Okay, right. So most disabilities are in fact hidden. And what are some examples, not yet, what are some examples of hidden disabilities? Press the button. Psychiatric disorders?
Psychiatric disorders.
Right. Can anybody else think of some? I said some before. So congestive heart failure, right? Depression, psychiatric disorder, diabetes, cancer, HIV, AIDS. Okay, now press the button, please. So here is an example of but a few of the hidden disabilities. There are many, 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 many more of those than we've listed. We don't have time to go over all of them. So what's the message there? You can't judge a book by its cover. You can't tell if a person has a disability or not. So you treat the people as you would have them treat you. Some call that the golden rule. I don't have permission to use that phrase. It's copyrighted. It was a joke. Wow. Okay, I feel like I've lost the crowd. Okay, any questions about that? We really like that. We really like that logo up there. Okay, on. Yes.
Where did socioeconomic issues come into the disability list? So being homeless or being impoverished could limit your ability to participate in major activities.
That's a good question. So does that count as a disability, being homeless? It does not. It does not. The things that may cause a person to be homeless might count as a disability, so that's not actually going to qualify being homeless as that, if that makes sense? A little bit. So go ahead.
Well, I mean, it seems somewhat arbitrary on whether if somebody is very, very low economic status in the U.S., they can't participate in life's activities either. So why do we limit it to this list and not include social issues?
So a life activity would be walking. A life activity would be seeing, hearing, participating fully in life. Not an opportunity to play sports, but say an opportunity, something that might limit you from doing those things, from breathing, from seeing, from living without being depressed, something like that. Those count as disabilities. But life activities, so just to be clear, a life activity, can you give me an example of a life activity that you might be talking about here?
Well, if you have almost no income, your ability to participate in a lot of activities in this country is going to be extremely limited.
But activities as in social activities, like going to a dance or eating out, right? Educate. So there are ways around that. There are huge barriers, social barriers, pay to play, all that sort of stuff. That's a societal construct. That's not a disability per se, as it relates to a person's opportunity and ability are not the same thing. So an opportunity to participate, if you have to pay, that's a barrier. But not being able to raise your heart rate because you'll have a heart attack is the type of major life activity that we're talking about here. Does that make sense?
I'll agree to disagree, and we can move on.
Okay, cool. Appreciate that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I don't think my thing's working. So this list that you have up here that's the 20% that you referred to earlier.
Yep. Question, ma'am?
Well, just in terms of what he was speaking to before about the homeless, I think this is relating more to physical disabilities versus socioeconomic disabilities.
Well, it is related to more to physical disabilities, but these can manifest physically. These hidden disabilities can manifest physically. So there's a in the disability biz, there's a difference between my type of physical disability and say lactose intolerance. Is that one? Wow. But now, that's not to say that all lactose intolerance is a disability, but it can be such that it's so severe that it would be a disability. So there are various degrees in this. You're not always automatically going to be counted as as a person with a disability if you have mild asthma, maybe, but it could be so severe that it would count. Yes, ma'am? It is largely defined, not entirely defined, but largely defined. Is a specific life activity, a major life activity, defined in the ADA? It absolutely is defined to a point, but it's not totally inclusive of all major life activities. Cool? Any other questions? Question. That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. Yes, sir. Back to you.
So once again, getting back to like the statistics that you were citing earlier, and
Yep.
the 20, you were saying earlier, 20% of Americans are qualify as being disabled.
Yes.
Is that same definition used in the ADA? For instance, like lactose intolerance.
Medically, it is. Legally, it may not be. And there's a little bit of. So when we say a disability, often these things are largely permanent. My disability is permanent. You can also be temporarily disabled, a person with a temporary disability. Say you have a knee injury or a broken arm or something like that. That could count medically as a disability. It wouldn't necessarily count. If let's say you had a temporary disability that required you to get a temporary reasonable accommodation for you to do your work, you'd be one of us, but just not for long. Cool? Okay. 10 minutes left. Okay. Question 10. 9. Okay, so horribly poorly written question here, but if you see this person, you shake his hand? You meet this person, you meet a person like this with a double umbrella, do you shake his hand automatically? If he offers it. Right, you press the button? I'm good at the button pressing.
If he offers it.
If
Yes.
he offers his hand, so you follow the person's lead, right? You don't automatically put yourself in a position to make a person feel uncomfortable. But if they want to shake hands, you shake hands. Cool? And this is a better description with the picture than it is written, so please don't read the written word. Okay, on to question 10. When speaking to a person who uses an interpreter, always speak directly to the person, not to the interpreter. True? What if you can't understand what the person's saying? And so let's say, so we say interpreter here, but let's change the fact pattern a bit. Let's say it's an aide or an assistant. So let's say I'm not able to push my wheelchair, but I have an assistant who's pushing my wheelchair for me, and I have a condition that prohibits me from being clearly understood when I speak. So I may have some type of condition or impediment that makes it difficult to understand. Still speak to me, or do you speak to the person who has experience in talking with me and can understand what I'm saying? Always talk to the person. Absolutely. Always talk to the person. So there are things that you can do when you meet somebody that may be difficult to understand, whether they have an assistant or not. So let's say that that I don't speak clearly and you want to talk to me. If you want to talk to me and put yourself in a position to understand what I'm saying and to be understood by me or by someone else, absolutely cool to say, hey, can we go over to a place where it's a little quieter or to a place where you can more visibly be seen so that you can participate in that communication in a better way. It's absolutely cool to say, I don't think I understand what you're saying, but just to be sure, did you in fact say that you would like to buy me a box of donuts? So you could ask a question to try and get to that understanding. Absolutely cool to do that. So that gives the person a chance to say, no, I don't want to buy you a box of donuts, Ian, as people often do. And then I would say, oh, so you would like me to buy you a box of donuts, and then you would answer in the affirmative, because who doesn't like donuts? So ask those questions. Give yourself a chance to be understood. Give them a chance to be understood. Now, as a bonus question, if you see me on campus and you want to talk to me, hopefully that happens at some point, do you stand and talk to me, or do you stoop or crouch to get on my eye level? Who thinks that you should crouch? Assuming that you'd want to talk to me. Who thinks that you should stand? Who thinks that they don't want to talk to me? Because not everybody's playing. So here's the rule. The rule is the conventionally understood rule and accepted rule is that we need to be on eye level, right? So you need to crouch. The conventional rule. I don't agree with that rule. My rule is I want you to be comfortable, because if you're not comfortable when we're talking, we're not going to talk for long. And I think that we should be friends. So I want you to be comfortable. If you're comfortable crouching, crouch. If you're comfortable standing, stand. if you're comfortable saying, hey, you get to sit, I want to sit too, let's go over there where there was a chair so we can talk, that's absolutely cool. But put yourself in a position to relate to the person in a good way. Okay? Any questions about that? So, I want to share with you a couple of things that happened to me at OHSU, and then I want to talk about those a little bit. So before we do that, I want you to consider your childhood for a second. Remember the first time that you saw a person with a disability. Not a family member, but somebody outside who you'd never seen before. And you might have been with a family member or a guardian or a parent or somebody who says to you, hey, 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 don't look. Don't stare at that person. Don't stare. Don't stare. Don't stare. Okay? So does anybody have that experience when they were a kid? Right? A few of you do. So the parents will say often, don't stare. Okay? Now, so think about that for a second while I tell you these scenarios. Last November, not last November, 2 Novembers ago, I had a meeting in Mack Hall across the way there. It was in the afternoon. It was in the cafeteria. We were the only people in the cafeteria. When the meeting was over, I went out into the hall. I was the only person in the hall. I was going a particular direction down the hall, up the hall, whatever it was. Somebody came around the corner reading a book. And this person had their head down as they were walking along, reading the book. And we're walking in opposite directions. We're passing, and just as we're passing, this person, while reading the book, jumps back, puts her back against the wall, and walks the rest of the way down the hallway. Never once looked up. There was no eye contact. There was no acknowledgement. Okay? That actually happened. And I'll tell you that as a person who's been in a wheelchair for 47 years, that happens all the time. That happened to me last week at Safeway. People get out of my way. I've never run into somebody purposefully, but people always think I'm gonna. So they get out of the way. Okay? Now, that doesn't bother me. 47 years, I've had tons of experience. But imagine that if you worked in a place where you might encounter a person, or you were a student at a place where you might encounter a person who's in a wheelchair or a mobility device for the first time in their life, and that happened. How would that person feel? Any guesses? They would feel, I think they would feel pretty crummy. I think they would feel pretty bad. Okay? So, that happened on a Wednesday. The very next day was a Thursday, oddly enough. And I was in the building next door, Plaza Cafe. And I had to go all the way down to the tram. And I wanted to see if, unlike the day before, I could make eye contact with somebody. Because I couldn't the day before. I'd struck out. I'd lost my magic, and I was a little bit panicked. I wanted to see if I could make eye contact. So, as I was going towards the tram by the Plaza Cafe, I was striking out, and I was afraid that I had, in fact, lost my magic. I couldn't make eye contact with anybody because everybody had their phone out, and everybody had their head down, and they were looking at their phone. So, not one to give up easily, I continued on walking up the hall, and I saw a guy with his back to the window. It was a beautifully sunny November day, which never happens, as you know, but it was pristine. It was crystal clear, lovely blue sky. The guy's got his back to the window. He's also sitting in a hospital-issued wheelchair, not a cool titanium wheelchair with red spokes like I have. It was a horribly awful plastic wheelchair. He was wearing a hospital gown and a bathrobe, and I put all those factors together to determine that this guy might, in fact, be a patient. And I thought he was depressed, and here's why I thought he was depressed. Because he was sitting with his back to the window on this perfectly blue sunny day, and he was looking at his feet. So I thought, right, I'm going to make eye contact with this guy. So as I was walking towards him, I did something that I don't normally like to do. I stared at him. Just walking towards him, and I was staring at him. And I know that's rude, but this was for science, so forgive me. So as I was getting closer and closer to this guy, I think he sensed that somebody was looking at him. So he started looking around. He's looking around, he's looking around, and then we lock eyes. We make eye contact. And the second we make eye contact, I nodded at him, and I smiled. And he did something I'll never forget. He sat up straighter, and he smiled back at me. So just for that second, that guy may have forgotten about his troubles, but either way, he felt better about himself. He felt welcome at OHSU. And I tell you these stories, because I encourage you to, when you have that opportunity, to make that eye contact, to make that acknowledgement, to say hi if it's appropriate, because it'll go a long way to making OHSU a more welcoming place for everybody, but specifically for people with disabilities. And going back to this earlier slide about people with hidden disabilities, you just never know if a person has a disability. But making that contact, making that acknowledgement can go a long way to making somebody feel better. And the weird thing was that when that person smiled at me, and I was having a great day, right? It was sunny outside, I had a new blue shirt on, plenty of coffee, everything was good. But when he smiled at me, I felt better about myself, right? And that's a good thing to do, okay? So I told you early that rule number 1 was don't ask a person how they acquire their disability. I said that to you as an adult, as an adult to a room full of adults. I absolutely believe that to be true. But if you have kids, if you know kids, if you work with kids, I want them to be told it's okay to ask. And it's okay to look. I still don't want them to stare, but I want them to look. I don't want people to be afraid. I don't want kids to grow up being afraid of people with disabilities. And I want them to grow up being confident and comfortable talking to people with disabilities. Now, I know this is a research-based institution, so I'm going to provide you evidence that this is a good thing to do. I have a 9-year-old daughter. And when I go to visit my 9-year-old daughter at school, and this is particularly true when she was younger, kids will often, and especially when she was younger, would almost always come up to me and say, hey, Mr. J, why are you in a wheelchair? What's wrong with your back? Why don't your legs work? Whatever it was. They'd ask me those questions, and I would always answer them, and I still do, always answer them honestly and as in-depth as they want to go. It usually lasts 5, 6, 7 questions, whatever it is, and then they get to that point where they have everything that they need to know, and then they follow up with another question. Does anybody know what that question is? The question, yes?
Can we ride in your wheelchair?
No, good guess, though. The question is, at school, when that happens, is how much longer is recess? Right? So they get what they need to know from me, and then they move on, and we're cool. Next time they see me, the next time they see me, they say, hey, Mr. J, how you doing? What's going on? If they see me at an ice cream store, it's, do you really need more ice cream? Because let's be serious, kids can be mean. So that's basically the training, right? So see the person, don't see the disability. Don't assume a person can't do something or doesn't need help. Get to know the person, talk to the person, ask the questions, challenge the assumptions, be engaging, be friendly. Let's make OHSU the place that we all know that it can be, and by including people with disabilities, that's one way that we can get there. Thanks for letting me crash your party, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any questions. Yes.
How the environment has changed in the U.S. during the last 42 years in terms of people's opinion, acceptance, accessibility in buildings?
Well, that's a great question. How has
simple question
acceptance changed and life changed? So I grew up in a very, very small town in southern Indiana. That's where I was injured. So in the late 60s, and I was the only person in that town who used a wheelchair. And there was no access to anything. I had to crawl upstairs. This is one of those terrible stories. I had to crawl upstairs to go to school. 3 flights of stairs in high school to get to high school, and to crawl downstairs. And there was no accessible bathroom, and I couldn't use my wheelchair in the school because there was no way to get the wheelchair up. So things have changed a lot. Things have changed a lot. People are still afraid of disability, I think. The assumption is that a person with a disability is, in fact, unable to do a lot of stuff. And I think that that's still true. I think it's less true than it was, but there's still some trepidation, some reluctance, some fear, I think. So things have improved a lot, but they got a long way to go.
For patients who
Yep.
require the use of a wheelchair outside of being a patient in the hospital,
Yep.
what's the hospital policy with regards to like being required to use hospital-issued wheelchairs or being like?
So you use a hospital. The patient will use a hospital-issued wheelchair until they leave the premises, and then they have to provide their own wheelchair. Does that make sense? that answer your question? Absolutely. Can they bring their personal wheelchair to the hospital? Absolutely. So I never go anywhere without my cool titanium wheelchair with red spokes. So if I were a patient here, I would get to use this here. Absolutely. Good question. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Push the button.
I ride the Max a lot, and there's a gentleman there who has a vision impairment, and he uses a white cane.
Yep.
Sometimes he can't figure out where an empty seat is. How do I not offend him by saying how to direct him to a seat?
Well, you say, sir, can I give you some assistance to find that seat? You're asking that question. You're not trying to be rude, right? You're asking that question from a good place. Now, that's not to say that people will always accept that, but I think if you come from a good place in asking that question, then you've done all that you can. Sir, is there something I can do to help you find that seat? Or, sir, there's a seat 2 steps to your left, something like that. You direct them, and it's often cool to ask the person with a person who's has a visual impairment, to say, is there some way that I can help guide you, whether it be by leading with the person with their elbow or whatever, and you ask them what works best for you, or what works best for them. So you give them the power to tell you what works best. Good question, but it's I don't think that that's offensive if it's coming from a good place. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Early in your presentation, you mentioned that most institutions should try to have 7% disabled persons or
person with disability. Great. Nice guess.
Employed.
Yep.
And that most of those institutions have about 3%. Have they also?
No, that's us. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know anybody else. I know no one's hitting 7.
So have we also looked at how many people have applied who have a disability?
We try to track that. So here's what happened here. So we don't right now track that. We are getting the software that will allow us to track that. So what happens if I know a person who has a disability is applying for a job at OHSU? What I do, and I'm allowed to do this, is I will ask the person if they're comfortable with me disclosing to a recruiter or to a hiring manager that this person has a disability. I never ask what the disability is. I don't want to know. I never forward that particular message, but I will say to the recruiter or the hiring manager, this person has applied for this job on this date, and this person has a disability, and as a federal contractor, we are required to have an aspirational hiring goal. Please give this person extra consideration. Yep.
I guess I found that interesting because to me that if you knew whether you had only like 3% or a small number applying, or you would know what kind of problem you were dealing with in terms of.
Well, it's the age old problem of people being too busy with too many responsibilities to do enough tracking so that we can collect that good data. So a recruiter may be responsible for 10 positions at one time, and keeping track of that data has been difficult. The software, hopefully, that we're adding will make that better, but it will be a challenge. That will always be a challenge. It's a good question, though. Any other questions? Okay. Well, great. Thank you all very much. And so Greta handed out a evaluation form. If I could beg of you, please, to fill out that evaluation form, and to Lynn, can I have people turn it into you, and then you can interoffice it to me. So please don't put your name on it. It's supposed to be anonymous, and all feedback is greatly appreciated. And I think she passed them out. We didn't get the evaluation form. Okay. Well.
We can send it by email.
Okay, great. I will do that then. That's great. Okay. Great. Well, thank you.